And I am delighted to welcome you to this panel organized by the IAF Industry Relations Committee and dedicated to the following issue: impact of government space policy changes on industry. It is obvious that the space industry activity is heavily dependent from programs decided and funded by governments. First, as a matter of fact, it is stated that income generated by institutional orders is ranging between roughly 60% of overall industry's turnover in Europe and above 90% in the US. Second, historically, governments gave birth to the space industry, developed it, and to some extent are sustaining it. Third, even if now the maturity of commercial activities tends to diversify the requirements towards industrial actors, the influence of institutional programs is still prevailing through either development or application programs for which governments are final customers. Last but not least, while competitiveness means technological excellence, it must be added that public space programs are still the main drivers for technological innovation. For all these reasons, space industry is highly sensitive towards the reorientations in space policies decided by governments. This statement is, of course, particularly relevant in the current context for economic crisis and impeded capability to implement ambitious policies under severe budgetary constraints. With that respect, our committee, the IAF Industry Relations Committee, considers of great importance to the collection and confrontation of experiences and views regarding this issue from both institutional and industrial actors. Thus, I am very honored this morning to welcome on the government panelist side Mr. Jean-Jacques Dordain, ISA Director General, Dr. Hiroshi Yamakawa, Secretary General of the Strategic Headquarters for Space Policy of the Japanese government. On the industry panelist side, we will have this morning Mr. James Chilton, Vice President Exploration Launch System from Boeing, Mr. Gilles Maquet, Vice President for Institutional Affairs in IADS Astrium, Mr. Shoshiro Asada, General Manager of the Space Systems Department in Amachai, Sir Martin Sweeting, Executive Chairman of the Surrey Satellite Technology Limited Company, and Mr. Luigi Pasquali, CEO of Thales Alenia Space in Italy. And this morning, we will have, acting as moderator, Mr. Mag Iskender, member of the Industry Relations Committee and President of McDonald Deepwater. So once again, thank you for attending this meeting, and Mag, I leave you the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. Good morning, everybody. This morning plenary will be in two parts. We designed it that way. The first part will be for each of the panelists to give an opening remark or make a short presentation. This should take about 30 minutes. The second part will be questions and answers. I'll be asking the panelists respectively questions to address and share their views with us. And this should take about 45 minutes. So in total, the two parts should be about an hour and a quarter. In theory, we should have time for a question or two from yourselves. If you want to ask a question, we will have people with forms to write the question on, pass them on to me, and I'll ask them on your behalf. Or alternatively, there are two mics at the two aisleways on the side. You can grab a mic and address the question. Given the number of panelists this morning, we have 7, and the time limits, and in the interest of an evenly distributed views from the panel and the session, I'm going to ask for time allotment, put time allotment before each question, and I will ask the panelists to please respect that and adhere to it. And to help us, Thomas is sitting down here in the front, and he will raise his hand once the time is up. All right? All right, so we start with part one. In preparation of the plenary, I've asked The panelists to prepare, as I said, opening remarks in general. Each panelist will take 3 minutes. I'll start with the panelists from the government side, Dr. Yamakawa and Mr. Dordain. And the question is really in general terms. Describe the major drivers behind the key space policy changes that are being introduced by your government. And we'll start with Mr. Dordain.
Okay, thank you. Changes in the European space policy, I will not speak of changes, I shall come back to that, but the European space policy in general is based on 5 major objectives. The first one is science-driven. This is the knowledge society. The number 2 is services to the citizens. The number 3, the competitiveness of industry. The number 4, security. And the number 5, the balance between autonomy and international cooperation. This is the European space policy objectives. They are described in a lot of documents. And I must say that there was no significant change in these type of objectives. Maybe security, this is something new because this is one of the characteristics of Europe. Security has not been the driver for space activities in Europe for 30 years. But I would rather speak of evolution of activities rather than change in policy. First of all, the volume of activities have changed, and I think that today we have more activities than what we could have 10 years ago, and especially with the arrival of the European Union, and I shall come back to that. Number 2, more and more complex program requiring more and more technologies and advanced technologies. And number 3, type of activities going to more and more services, giving range to giving birth to more operators and more downstream industry. So this is the scope. Now, obviously, the objective of the space policy are not the only. They are not the only drivers for industry. What has shaped the European industry in the last 30 years is certainly the industrial policy of ISA. There is an industrial policy at ISA, defined by Article 7 of the Convention. And I would like to recall the 4 objectives of the industrial policy, because there is a lot of stories on that. The number 1 is cost efficiency. This is the first objective of the industrial policy. The second one is support to the competitiveness of European industry, meaning that we are in charge of sustaining the competitiveness of European industry. Number 3, the fair distribution of activities among member states. And number 4, competitive bidding. And all that has shaped the European industry. The last point that I would like to mention is the fact that in Europe, the government market is limited, and the government market cannot sustain by itself a sound European industry, meaning that European industry has no choice but to be on the worldwide commercial market. And they are successful, but obviously it makes that industry very fragile. And this is certainly one of the characteristics of the European industry today: competitive, successful on the worldwide market, but dependent on that commercial market. So this is, in broad terms, the situation of European industry. Obviously, I shall come back later because I have seen that there are other questions on the major changes which happen in Europe, both on the industrial side and on the government side, with the entry into force of the new EU treaty, which gives a specific competence to EU for space. And that is the 2 changes on which I shall come back.
Thank you. Dr. Yamakawa, please go ahead.
Could you show the slide, please? Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think I will first describe the Japanese recent change in the space policy. based on a new organization. Please go to the next slide. Yes, this is the current organization of the Japanese space-related ministries, and you can see. I'm sorry, the words are very. The characters are very small, and there are 9 ministries which have space-related missions. And for example, JAXA, which is written on the low left corner, JAXA belongs to MEXT, which stands for Ministry of Education, Sports, Culture and Science Technology. And but other than JAXA or MEXT, there are 8 ministries in Japan. So it's very difficult to coordinate everything on the Japanese government side. So about 2 years ago, a new organization which is called Strategic Headquarters for Space Policy was established. And the Director General of that headquarters is the Prime Minister, Mr. Kan. And the Deputy Director General is the Chief Cabinet Secretary and also Minister for Space Policy. And as I said, this organization was established because there are so many ministries which has space-related missions. And you can see that the total budget of the Japanese government for space is about 3 billion euros. And about 2 billion euros from the 3 billion euros is belong to JAXA. So you can see that the remaining 1 billion euro is for the other ministries. So that's why this new organization was established about 2 years ago. Please go to the next slide. And about 2 years ago, the government has enforced a national space law, a new national space law, whose there are 6 main items written in the law. The first one is to ensure rich and secure and safe life, for human life, and contribute to the enhancement of national security, and also to promote the utilization of space for diplomacy as an asset. And number 4, create a new energetic future by promoting R&D of the forefront areas, technologies. And the number 5, which is the main topic of this plenary session, to foster strategic industries for the 21st century. And number 6, contribute to the environment. And in that article, it is written that the space development and use shall be carried out in order to strengthen the technical capabilities and international competitiveness of the space industry and other industries of Japan. Next slide, please. And this year, in May, a new, but relevant, important measures was established by the Japanese government, which puts focus on mainly to the growth of Japan, especially in economical growth. And the measures is composed of the 3 chapters. Number 1 is that since the Japanese government budget was mainly poured into the R&D, research and development, for these 20 or 30 years, but more importantly, we have to go into the more user-oriented side. So, number 1, user-oriented space policy to create world-class space user community. And number 2, we have to think space as a strategic asset, and to enhance international and to do that, we have to enhance international cooperation. And then number 3 is the research and development, which means that the leading edge science and technology as an innovation engine. So these are these really, I think, affect the Japanese space industry, and which will for the economic growth of Japan. And this is the summary of my talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very informative. I've also asked the industry panelists to prepare a 3 minutes general comments. Let's not get into specifics. Specifics will unfold as we progress with this session. And the question is, in general terms, describe the major impacts to your companies resulting from recent government's policy changes and evolution. And I'll start with Mr. Pasquale. Please.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I think that, as Jean-Jacques Dordain has said, industry cannot be national or regional in this moment for different reasons, mainly also because institutions cannot support extensively or in totality the possibility to grow and to continue to grow in the technology innovation. So industry is obliged to be worldwide level, and we do. I mean, Thales Alenia Space is a company that is based in Europe, definitely, but as you know, has a large footprint at the global level in market view. Now, of course, since we are based in Europe, I think that we should start. Today we are speaking about governmental policies and their effect on industries. We should start by making some comments on the European scenario. Definitely, the European scenario is impacted and will be more and more impacted also by something that is going to happen outside of Europe. Something like very important that is going to happen, is happening now in the United States. We have just now heard about a policy in Japan. But in Europe, definitely, we can identify a number of clear elements which define the scenario due to the governmental and space policies that have been changed and improved in the last years. I think that the more distinctive factor that we can see is that space today in Europe is definitely something that is mainly driven by applications for citizens and for economy. We have heard from Jean-Jacques Dordain that the key words for ESA, which is the European Space Agency, so the entity that today makes coherent the number of governmental policies of the member states, are environment, security, climatology, so words that are very close to citizens' needs. That's why the major programs that are now running in Europe are Galileo, are Meteosat, are GMES, so programs which have this distinctive factor. By the way, space, which was since decades driven also or mainly by science, with a broad meaning of science. Science includes innovation, research and development, includes exploration. Cannot forget to maintain also this important aspect, because this is something that basically is, let's say, at the root of the space technologies. And again, the policy now is going towards the need to make exploration and science more close to citizens. This is a clear, distinctive factor that we are facing in Europe. Of course, this is something that is going to create and is already creating a number of small, medium enterprises or large enterprises devoted to value-added services, integrated services. And also this is a factor which creates more sustainable investments because of these, let's say, social implication of space evolution. The other distinctive factor has been already mentioned by Jean-Jacques is the competition. A number of elements, one of those, of course, not the only one, but maybe the most important, due to the budget constraints, but also to this evolution which creates the need to improve competitiveness. And this is a clear factor that we are also watching in Europe, in our field. Competitiveness is something that gives to our customers, institutional customers, agencies, ESA, and gives the best answers in terms of content and cost. And industry, I would say, I speak for Thales Aerospace, but pretty convinced that my colleagues of other industries shared this view. Industry likes competitiveness because it's a way to challenge ourselves and to find a way daily to improve our processes, to reduce our costs, to contribute with new ideas and technologies. So this is a second distinctive factor that we see in Europe in this moment. The third one is something that we know about a clear evolution towards a single European space policy. I say single, I stress this term because today is a coherent European policy made by ESA by summing up a number of national needs, which are also some, let's say, national space policies. We are definitely going towards the European single space policy, which will also have an impact on the distribution of money and investments, which will be important. This is something that also we are experiencing in each country. In my country, Italy, is the same. ASI is totally in line with the ESA approach, with the European approach. In addition to that, with a number of coherent programs, work on national programs like Cosmos Skymed for Earth observation based on SAR technology, which is coherent, for instance, for GMS, with GMS and other European approaches. So the scenario is clear, is evolving, is something that contains a number of elements which are very positive even for us, and Thales Aerospace, like other industries, are following. We are following this by having dedicated research and development, dedicated efforts on that. Of course, nothing is, not all is so bright. There are issues. Issues are coming because budget constraints first, but are also coming because a number of things are not completely clear. Number of long-term objectives, mainly in exploration and science, are not completely clear. There is an evolution in place. So maybe it's something that we will explore a little better in the next discussions, but there are issues inside. And on these issues, we have to make our agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Asada.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My slide, please. At first, I'd like to introduce Japanese government's space policy changes. In 2008, we had space law for the first time in Japan. And based on this space law, basic plan for space policy was established in 2009. And among these space policy changes, I selected 3 major policy changes impact on Japan's space industries. The first is to promote space-related industries. The second is to promote international cooperation. The third is to broaden the peace principle. The first space policy change is promotion of space-related industries. Japanese government now put more emphasis on the promotion of space as an industry, as well as research and development in science and technology. According to these space policy changes, we'd like to develop and provide more competitive space products and services to the international market. We have to make product to meet the demand of the marketplace, and we'd like to provide trustworthy, assured, punctual services like Japan's bullet train, Shinkansen. The second policy change is promotion of international cooperation. Government proceed promotion of space diplomacy as well as encouraging international cooperation. According to this space policy change, we should contribute, we should have a plan, make a plan to contribute to advancing country by space technologies, and also to activate international cooperation at company-to-company level. For example, we'd like to make an international cooperation by applying derived HTV for international space exploration after extension life of ISS. The third policy change is broadening of peace principle. Based on space law in Japan, Japan's space activities for peaceful purpose becomes understanding from non-military use to non-aggressive use in confirmation with the principles of Japan's peace constitution. According to this policy change, industries to study space activities have to contribute to Japan's national security, to apply reconnaissance, early warning, and so on, and to study responsible space. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Asada. Jim Chilton from Boeing.
Good morning, and thank you, Mag, and thanks to the Congress for inviting me here today. In the United States and North America in general, we're in the middle of a big policy shift. It isn't entirely clear what the final policy would be as the administration and the executive branch of the U.S. government and the Congress debate and negotiate what the final form our programs will take. But I can characterize the shift for you through the lens of a new national space policy that was publicized in June. Of course, many plans and implementation details remain, but the policy generally encourages stimulation of commercial industry, international collaboration, and technology development. There are great positives in this. One, I think everybody in the Congress would generally be happy about is removing the uncertainty about the International Space Station. It'll be the U.S. government policy to support station beyond 2015 and perhaps beyond to 2020 and perhaps beyond. And I think that removes uncertainty for many people working in the space station arena and service. And I would, so I start with some good news. I would argue beyond that, there is a lot of uncertainty. And so if you talk about the impact to companies and industry, I think the uncertainty is the impact. And that's because space industries and people who work in the space part of companies that are in other industries compete for resources. And we compete not only inside the space industry, but we compete in the larger economy for resources and talent. And traditionally, this is a desirable place to work, but we are seeing the shift have an effect on our investment profiles and, frankly, on our ability to retain talent. I'll characterize, from an industry perspective, the shift is, you could look at it as a change in the market, perhaps. Traditionally, we've looked at missions, government-led missions, and they pull products and services and capabilities out of us. The government will define and declare a mission, an exciting, beyond LEO sometimes, exploration type thing, and industry reacts. And our reaction is typically within well-understood business transactions. And it occurs that this shift appears to be heading in a place where instead of missions pulling things in understood transactions, it's more of a push. We're going to push investment to stimulate commercial industry. We're going to push technologies that could contribute to not fully characterized missions. And so the time horizons become different and the uncertainty becomes greater. And I think that uncertainty, while it could be a great opportunity, today is causing us to do a lot of thinking, and that uncertainty is an impact. The impact is it's just hard to connect the investments we're making and the planning we're doing with a certain return. We're not sure exactly what business we're going to be in. We're committed to the business, but it's harder now for us to predict what the future will be. The business models may be as important as the technology going forward, and the time horizons for technology push versus mission pull could mean our planning cycles have to shorten substantially. So all that uncertainty impacts the way we do business. I can kind of close as Tomas has given me the eye here. I'll close by saying one impact is certain, and that's workforce impact as our large traditional programs wind down. I know my colleagues in industry primes and our suppliers forecast 10 to 20,000 job losses in the very near term. And then our ability to attract talent, we're finding the statistics, it's especially difficult in the young professional arena. People coming out of school and people who have entered the industry for 2 or 3 years and then find themselves in this shift. And we look forward to getting the uncertainty behind us and being able to characterize what we'll be doing and solving that.
Thank you, Jim. Sir Sweeting.
Oh, very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for getting up early and braving the rain to join us here today. Have a slide, please. And the first point, I want to address slightly different way the impacts on business from government policies, really in 3 areas. Firstly, in Earth observation. I mean, it's quite clear that a government policy can have significant impact on the commercialization of Earth observation data. Good policies can support it, less good policies can impede it. For example, governments giving away free Earth observation data can make the business case for commercial data providers really quite hard. And surely now the technology in Earth observation is sufficiently mature that the commercial sector can supply that data. And I think that we have the opportunity, therefore, to encourage governments to provide data policies which are going to stimulate the commercial provision of data, to relieve governments from the burden of having to fund all the space assets, and to provide a stimulating business environment for Earth observation suppliers. Indeed, there have been some good examples of this when governments really do collaborate in a coordinated way. We can have quite disproportionate benefits. We've seen this perhaps in good examples in the disaster monitoring constellation, where governments working together both nationally to stimulate new business concepts, and then internationally to make the best use of the assets in orbit. And then if we look at the rapidly growing requirements of Earth observation data, one of the major users of data are governments, and governments developing policies which utilize and stimulate the commercial provision of that data, particularly as we go to increasingly high resolution resources. This can ease the burden of procurements on governments and stimulate industry, and then also stimulate the value-added chain. I'd like to move to the second point, please, and that is just touching on exploration. Exploration, which is essentially scientific and social, has been the domain of governments for decades. But the cost of this is extremely high, and the pace, to be honest, is rather slow. And I think having increased commercial involvement in space exploration, and we've seen some examples, particularly in the launcher field, with SpaceX driving the commercialization of the launchers alongside other established commercial suppliers. I think taking a different approach to space exploration to increase this pace and reduce the cost is something which governments policy can support specifically. And then my third point is really more focused on the European environment. Within Europe, we see the European Commission taking a larger role in space. And the European Commission is a much closer commercial customer to space than some of the other agencies, and particularly because the juste retour process within EC is not so strong. This is good, and for example, within Galileo, we have seen that this gives rise to perhaps a much more commercial approach for the operational systems, and this saves the European taxpayer significant funding. So I think we can see the policies that governments are going to, or are going to implement, clearly are very closely linked to driving commercial success. Commercial success can in turn make government implementations quicker and also save the taxpayer substantial sums. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Martin. Mr. McKay, Austria.
Yes, good morning. So no questions. I think that the space industry has been able to face situation responding to major government policy changes. Looking to the past, one significant example of that is what has been done in the UK with the UK Ministry of Defence, when they decided less than 10 years ago to change from procuring an infrastructure for secure telecom and thinking about procuring service provision. They took their time. It was a more than 3 years process. One first year to think within themselves on how they could build criteria for evaluation to compare usual procurement and with service provision. Another year for international competition, and a third year for discussing the contract. And the result is a major, major breakthrough for procuring services with a 15 years contract. So this is a major change in the way that the US government has decided to procure secure telecommunication. Looking to the present, I would like to mention the very efficient work performed by European Space Agency for the procurement reform. The process has started more than 2 years ago, and we are very thankful that industry has been asked to work with them. And I think this is not a trivial change. With this new procurement reform, which now has been adopted for a large part of it, this is a new era in the relationship between industry and ESA, and this is good, and this is good. But I think the main change is the future one. And to go along the line of what has been said by Jean-Jacques, the European model is at stake. What is European model? The European model is a combination of institutional revenues. 50 or 60% of industry revenues are coming from institutions, and commercial revenues, 40 to 50%. And we have been living with that model. And this has been very successful. It has been a unique model all over the world. And thanks for what has been done with the industrial policy before, we have been there. But this model is at stake, because when we look to the two faces of the model, the first one, the key word is uncertainty. Uncertainty on what will be the future budget, the future programs concerning institutions. For sure, military space budget will decrease. This is not the future, this is today. Decision have been taken for that. And concerning civil budget, they are scrutinized, they are questionable, they are under discussion, and for industry it means uncertainty, uncertainty. And more than that, ongoing programs are reviewed at the moment and with a lot of questions. On the other side of the coin, the market, the commercial and export market, is becoming much more difficult. There is a huge competition coming from the US, coming from China, coming from India. And here again, we do not see that for the future. This is a fact. For example, the European industry has lost 1 billion euro of orders with telecommunication satellite in the last 4 months. Lost with our traditional customers. So the other side of the coin is at stake as well. So we are there. We are there with a combination of factors. This is not the result of a unique change, a combination of factors which are putting the European model at stake. What can we do? This is the answer for the next question, maybe. But I think the key word in that case is partnership. Partnership, and we need partnership to bridge the gap between institutional market and commercial market. Partnership is essential.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKay. A very useful insight from all of you. Thank you. We shift now to the second part of the plenary, which is to address more specific and recent issues. The first question is to Mr. Dordain and Dr. Yamakawa. What specific space policy changes, evolutions, shifts have your government introduced recently, and why? As an example, Mr. McKay spoke of procurement reforms in Europe. What would your views be about something of that nature? We'll start with Mr. Dordain.
Okay, thank you. So to take back what Gilles Maquet was saying, the relationship between ESA and industry has evolved a lot in the last 30 years. I think that we have the basic objectives of the industrial policy of ESA, but obviously this is a living industrial policy and procurement. And just to say that in that evolution, we have introduced a different type of relationship between ESA and industry, to the point that today a significant part of our programs are made much more on a partnership basis than on a relationship between a customer and a supplier. And we have developed a lot of public-private partnership, again, ILAS, AlphaSat, Small Geo Mission, and so on, which is changing fully the relationship between government and industry. Also, we have to. You are speaking of the change of government policy on industry, but I would like to say also that there is changes in industry which has an impact on the government policy, because some changes are taking place in industry that we are not driving, and that the commercial market is driving, and we have to take that into account. Just to say that 10 years ago, there were a consolidation of the prime contractors into two big aerospace and defense consortia with Astrium on one side and Thales Alenia on the other side. But we have seen in the recent years the arrival of new primes in addition to these two big aerospace and defense, and we have to take that into account in our policy, as well as the consolidation of equipment suppliers. So this is not only one way, this is a two-way influence. Now, coming back to your question, two problems. I would not like to give the impression that this is only, and that has been mentioned by some of my previous colleagues, this is not only the change of space policy of European governments which have an influence on European industry. There is a lot of changes in government policy in the United States, in China, in India, in Japan, which have a direct influence on European industry. Let's say the change of, for example, the change of the US space policy concerning the International Space Station with the extension to 2020, the change of the exploration program have a consequence on what we are doing. The same on technology export restrictions, and so on and so on. So this is a global, as Luigi was saying, this is a global market. And obviously, the consequences are not coming only from European government. Focusing on European government, obviously, the recent change is certainly the consequence of the EU treaty, giving to the European Union a specific competence on space. And this is good news for Europe. I must say that it's all positive. But now we have to see how we can take, and when I say we, it's not only governments but also industry, we can take the best benefit of this new EU treaty for consolidating the position of Europe in space. Meaning that today we have three basic actors in Europe, which is the European Union, ESA, and member states, which all have activities in space, and we shall have to organize coherence and complementarities in not only in the European, in the space policy. I think that the space policy, there is already a unique space policy, but the way we shall implement that space policy through three different channels, EU, ESA, and member states, have still to be consolidated. And again, we are working together, and especially between ESA, the Commission, and the member states to see how we can develop together policies for industry and for procurement, which can organize the complementarity of these three channels of funding. This is still to be to come. We have some experience with the Galileo and with the GMES. I would like just to make maybe a nuance with what has been said on the procurement of Galileo. The procurement of Galileo has not been a commercial procurement by far. There were some constraints, significant constraints, I would say, with the division in 6 work package and some constraints on each work package. I would not call that a commercial approach, and this is normal. I must say that, in my view, public funding and commercial approach, why not? But we have still to discuss on what could be the framework of this type of procurement. So we have at least the lessons learned of Galileo and GMES, and taking into account the lessons learned of Galileo and GMES, I am sure that we shall make some progress, and that we shall be able to have, someone has spoken of, I don't know if this has been mentioned, but a European market. I don't know. We have to work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Dr. Yamakawa, 3 minutes, please.
Yes. I think I'd like to mention 4 concrete examples for space policy change. And the first one is exploration. As you know, the Hayabusa spacecraft returned to the Earth this June after a 7-year flight to the asteroid Itokawa. And this August, the government has determined to promote the second one, the Hayabusa 2. And talking about the ISS, International Space Station, also in August, the Japanese government has decided to extend the Japanese participation into the ISS after 2016. Of course, there's lots of things to discuss, but the basic idea is to extend this participation duration. And number 2 is about about the development of the new launch vehicle and space satellites. And talking about this new launch vehicle, the Japanese government has decided to develop a new solid launch vehicle whose name is Epsilon rocket, and which has about 1.2 LEO capability. And also a new type small satellite, which weighs about 400 kilograms, mainly for Earth observation. And the third strategy is about the navigation satellite. Just 2 weeks ago, on September 11th, the H2A rocket has launched a navigation satellite, whose English name is QZSS, and the Japanese name is Michibiki, was successfully launched. And that was the first Japanese navigation satellite. But there's a tremendous discussion in Japanese government about the possibility to launch the second and third one. And this is mainly for, not only for governmental use, but also for the commercial use. And this is a heavy discussion. There's a heavy discussion still ongoing between industry and the government. And talking about number 4, and the final one is about the launch window. And until this year, from Tanegashima or from Uchinora in Kagoshima area in Japan, we can launch only about 119 days per year. I mean, mainly in summer and winter due to many problems. But recently, the Japanese government has determined to extend the launch window to all year, 1 year, whole year. So I think this has a tremendous impact on the commercial launch, and that's the main 4 changes recently.
Thank you very much. The next question is to the panelists from Astrium and Thales Alenia. We'll start with Mr. Mackay. 3 minutes each, please. This is about specific examples of constraining policies, recent constraining policies, changes that you are facing in your companies, and what impact, if any, on your 3 to 5 year planning process. Mr. Mackay.
Yes. For me, the most constraining policy change is the huge difficulty we are facing to build long-term partnership. Mention has been made of existing partnership with ESA, for example, for Alphabus, for the small geo. We have a partnership with DLR for Terasa, but let me quote a very practical example. The Earth observation spot family from spot 1 to spot 5 has been 100% funded by French government, a small co-funding on spot 5. And this has been operated by a private company, Spot Image and Fotera. So this is a partnership. Yes, good, it has worked. However, now for spot 6 and 7, the French government position is to say, no, this is commercial and you have to fund 100% of that. So we had long discussions and the result is, yes, Astrium has taken the decision to fund 100% for the procurement of these 2 satellites, 300 million euros from our own pocket. Good. When we see what is happening in the US, we see that there is a long, sustainable policy to procure space images. And this has started 20 years ago with policy directives and with contracts as vehicles to procure images. Clearview in 2003, NextView in 2004, EnhancedView in 2010 with $7.3 billion. So this is a sustainable policy, a long-term policy. By the way, this last contract means 10 years of turnover for each of the 2 companies. So this gives a difference that we are facing in Europe and in the US, what I say, long-term partnership. Markets are evolving. Competition is becoming increasingly more difficult. So we cannot go from one situation with 100% public funding to a situation with 100% private funding just like that. We need to work on that. We need to have that changing on a certain long-term approach. And this is the key challenge for us.
Thank you. Mr. Pasquale.
I take as an example the field of exploration, because I think that is one of the fields where we are looking to the major impact on governmental changes. Of course, I refer to the important, I already mentioned, change that is going to happen in the United States. We know that NASA has decided to reshuffle the United States space program in this field. And this is something that has opened a debate internally in the US, but also at worldwide level, because as Jean-Jacques said, I totally agree, it's a dynamic where there is a big interaction between different actors. It's not only a problem of governmental changes, but also industrial changes. is not only a problem of a specific region, but also on all the regions where space has an important stake. Now, this debate is not, seems to be not frozen. I mean, frozen in the sense to have identified a clear path towards a long-term objective. And this also gives uncertainties. There are a number of elements which are going on, which are good. For instance, a company like Thales Space, that we are very much involved in the International Space Station development. The fact that the International Space Station lifetime is extended, the idea, the American idea of commercialization of the logistic, like the commercial CRS that we are developing together with the Prime Orbital, with a great success and results, is good. More international cooperation is good, but there is a number of uncertainties, and consequently we don't know exactly which is the final stage, but also the different steps to arrive to that stage. And this has an impact, definitely has an impact, is an issue, because industry today has the need to make its own plan, and in the interaction that Jean-Jacques has mentioned, we risk also to take the wrong route, or at least to not contribute at the right time, so losing efficiency in the answer. This is an aspect which is very important, is for us a matter of high attention in the next years, because it's an important part of our activities. But I feel that is also an important part of the space programs in terms of content, as I said at the beginning, in terms of its meaning as a root of the space industry.
Thank you. Next question is to the panelists from Boeing and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Jim and Mr. Asada. As Mr. Pasquale mentioned, the US government is making a shift towards commercial model and is encouraging commercial crew and cargo transportation. What are your company's views with respect to the maturity of space explorations to be moving into a commercial model at this stage? We'll start with Jim.
From a maturity standpoint, I would go back to a decade and start by saying we understand how to create product. I think industry can develop product. The Delta IV and sea launchers were developed in 6 or 7 years. One was an international innovation, one was more domestic, entered the commercial market. Atlas arrived at the same time. I think we would all say we found our problem was not getting into business, it was staying there. And as Jean-Jacques mentioned, then things happened in industry that changed the government's ability to buy launchers. So step one, maturity, is we can create product. There's no reason to think we couldn't do that. From an in-space standpoint, if we talk specifically about human access to space, commercially the technology exists. You could extrapolate as industry took on a larger and larger role in launchers. We should be able to do so in space systems. We're believers, and many of you have seen Boeing's public statements where we're exploring that and exploring it hard, trying to make sure we understand how the business model would work. So I think in general, when you talk about maturity, it isn't a technology issue. It's a, can you characterize the business model, get the product in service, and then stay in service. I would argue the business models don't fully exist today. Doesn't mean they won't, but you could argue that any one that does arrive and succeed is disruptive by definition. It'll be a new business model, and the rest of us will react. So we're working hard to explore the possibilities. There are a lot of complexities, like do you need a launcher of your own to be in the commercial crew or commercial business in general? In the existing commercial markets, you don't. You can move around launchers, so that's a complexity. We have to be able to characterize the non-government market, but also understand what the government's going to do. No one wants to end up creating a system at private expense and ending up competing with government systems, be they domestic or foreign. So that's also a complexity. So our answer would be yes. The maturity is there from a technological standpoint. Can you get into a business model where your cost and reliability allow you to sustain the business? And I think we have some recent lessons that say that's more of a challenge than just getting the product or the service.
Okay, thank you. The answer.
Development and operating of the launch vehicle is led by private sectors in technological, both technological and financial point. Based on these definitions, I'd like to discuss about maturity of commercial mode. Yes, we have enough experience to develop and launch space transportation system for more than 50 years. Under this background, we are technically qualified for the commercial space transportation competition in the world. In the United States of America, they have a big budget for space development, 10 times more than Japan. Then they will have enough amount of launches to maintain their business, even if they would accept the commercial mode. They could have appropriate return to their investment from a sufficient number of launches. However, at least in Japan, and maybe almost other countries, except for United States, I don't think that the demand for space transportation system is enough to maintain launch businesses in a commercial mode. Therefore, I think space transportation system is technically mature, but is economically premature to move to commercial mode. In addition, our experience in Japan is limited to unmanned space transportation system. Therefore, a commercial crew transportation is out of question for us. Even in United States of America, I have a question that they could achieve the same safety level for commercial space transportation system compared with commercial airplane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is to Sir Martin Sweeting. UK government has recently decided to form a space agency. What impact do you see on the UK space industry in general and more specifically on SSTL, Surrey Satellite?
Thank you, Mag. The UK formed a space agency in April this year. This is very welcome. It's long overdue. The UK, I think, is one of the few G20 countries that does not have a space agency up until then. And it was the result of a 6-month study carried out by industry, by government, and by academia in last year, which looked at the current importance and role of space to the UK economy and UK security. The result of this study brought to the attention of the government that space really is now deeply embedded in our society. I don't need to explain to this audience in how many ways that is true. But this really had sort of crept up somewhat in the UK without being noticed. And so the result of a space strategy for innovation and growth in the UK recommended, first of all, the formation of the agency, and secondly, a series of recommendations whereby space would be further up the priority list in UK government and policy issues. So this is actually, I think, of fundamental importance to the UK space industry. The UK does not have a large national program. It plays primarily in the international field, and having a strong and coordinated agency to assist in this is clearly going to help the industry, and we hope also, of course, that raised priority in government will mean a greater role of government in utilizing space services, whether it be communications, navigation, or Earth observation, or indeed playing our part in the exploration and science community worldwide. It's also quite clear that space contributes substantially to the UK economy, and also in developing and stimulating young people to enter high technology, not necessarily space, but other related high technology industries. So having a UK focus at the space agency level is clearly going to help that. Within focusing more immediately on our local interests in SSTL, we hope that the formation of the new agency will give a better focus to international MOUs and collaborations. It will provide a more coherent role of government in supporting technology demonstration through the Technology Strategy Board in the UK, and also to have perhaps more constructive policies relating to the space licenses and the space policies, as I mentioned earlier, specifically with Earth observation. Thank you.
Thanks. Next question is to Dr. Yamakawa. Mr. Dordain spoke of the impact of industry changing on government policies. He mentioned consolidation of industry as an example. What's your government view and approach towards startup, new companies, new entrants, versus established large-size companies, small versus big, that sort of point? Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, as I said, about 2 years ago, Japan has established its national space law, but there's still no space activity law, which is a legislation to supervise or authorizes the space activities in Japan or by Japanese nationals. And so currently the government is discussing to legislate a new space activity law, which in order to reduce the risks of new players, the new entrants or new companies, and to reduce those risks of new players and ensure sound development of new space industries. So that's the current approach, and I think it will need some time to legislate that kind of activity law. But the basic idea is to support new entrants, new companies, although it may be large or small companies, but the basic approach is like that. And talking about large companies or or a traditional company, I would say. Of course, the government is, in a way, working together. So that direction, the government will continue to work, support.
Well, thank you. I have more questions, but we ran out of time, basically. So I would like to turn to the audience and see if there are any questions in the audience. There were some very hardcore topics raised and views expressed. Anybody has any questions? Sir, in the front. The mics are in the back, unfortunately. Oh, Thomas is going to bring the mic, so easier this way. Thank you, Tom. Please identify whom you're addressing the question to.
Sure, Peter Desalli with Space News. Two questions. One question for Martin Sweeting and perhaps Gilles Mackay. It's the same question, and the other one for James Shilton of Boeing. First, for Sir Martin, you said that government policies and data access can encourage or discourage commercial activities, and I think that was fairly clear. So my question to you is the new European policy that's been adopted by the European Space Agency, it seems about to be adopted by the European Commission, is that, in your opinion, of a nature to encourage or discourage a new commercial Earth observation entrance? Mr. Mackay, your company is, as you said, investing 300 million euros on its own.
Okay, Mr. Mackay.
So what is done at the European level to design and to shape specific policy for Earth observation images, in our view, is positive. It's a long way to go, but what is done around the GMES program, gathering European Commission, ESA, and industry, is positive. What is questionable, what I mentioned in my intervention before, is the support that we need from the European government. We need not a one-shot support. We need a long-term support from them when progressively there is a shift from institutional support to the commercial market. And this is good. This is a win-win situation. When I see what has been done in the US, it's important to outline that in the last 10 years, the quantity of images have been multiplied by a factor 7, and the price of images has dropped by a factor 20. So the US government, when having a long-term policy for sustaining his industry, is a beneficiary of the result. That's what we aim at in Europe. This is starting, but this has to be put in a long-term perspective.
Thank you. If I can just add very briefly to that, we also welcome it. I think that we do need a long-term stable policy. Anything that can encourage the private sector to provide the capability and for the government sector to procure the results is, I believe, going to end up in a more efficient, more available and a better quality service for the end user, which is eventually the citizen.
Jim, the next question.
Question for me was, are we discouraging people? Let me clarify. We're in an environment where we're shedding probably 20,000 jobs in mainline space industries. Young professionals and people coming out of schools have other options. They can go in aviation, they can go in automotive.
Jim, you want to speak a bit closer to the mic?
A little closer. So right now we're in an environment where we're shedding some 20,000 jobs in historical civils, in our mainline civil space industry. Young professionals and people coming out of school have other options. And so when you add being in a declining job market to them asking the question, what will I be working on in the next few years? The uncertainty bears directly on what choice they make. And we're finding they're making choices. Historically, we've had no trouble. We're finding they're making choices to be somewhere else until we know what we'll be working on. Does that help?
Any other questions from the audience? Any comments from the rest of the panel related to the last question, or any views that want to be expressed? Well, I think we thank you very much for the panel members. I appreciate you taking the time to join us, and you're expressing all these views on this important issue. And I'll pass it back to John-Yves. John.
Okay. So, thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists for the very extensive and diversified opinions expressed upon today's subject. Bearing in mind that the crucial interaction between governmental and industrial actors in space activities, I think it has been very valuable to have your respective testimonies and views with that respect, especially when everybody has to cope with constrained circumstances in the current economic context. In particular, I take note of the following outcomes as striking features I think both governments and industries should keep elaborating upon. First point, I heard this morning the specificities of government policies. We heard about Europe, Japan, the US, and I am sure that if we had representatives from Russia, China, India, or Brazil, we would have had other opinions. The second point, which is very critical and very impressive, is the adaptation of industry, both in Europe, adaptation to the European Union policy, to ESA policy, to national space policies, in Japan, with the need to adapt to government needs, and in the US, with sometimes an opposition between return of investment for big companies and new initiatives as SpaceX. But the last point, which is, in my opinion, the most important, is that both government and industry do not like uncertainties, and sometimes it may be opposite to changes, and if I want to summarize, in fact, what we need are evolutions, but not revolutions. So, again, I am very grateful to you for giving us this enlightening perspective of how industry and governments should interact for the mutual benefit of efficient and successful space policies, fitting the general public request and justifying the performing investments for both governments and industry. I thank you for your attention for this morning. Thank you very much.